Welcome, everybody. It's Saturday of Equine Health Week, which means one thing, for really important date in the diary for us all. We're going to launch our new venues handbook. So I'm delighted to be joined by Celia Marr, who is the chair of the Equine Infectious Diseases Advisory Group. Celia is a member of the team at Rosdales in Newmarket and specialises in internal equine medicine. So diseases is really your thing, Celia. Lovely to have you with us. Let's just start with talking a little bit about the group, why it was formed, what your aims are, and what it does.
Sure. Very, very happy to be here, Winnie. Thank you. So this group was formed towards the end, or the idea for forming this group occurred in the sort of middle to end of 2019. Because it was recognized, I think, after the flu problems that we had throughout that spring and summer, that there was a need for a kind of a body of individuals who could help support the equestrian sports when disease occurs. So it was the brainchild, really, of John McEwen, who is Director of Equine Sports Science and Medicine for British Equestrian, together with a number of other people, Jane Nixon and Philip Ivans, who is another internal medicine specialist. So we got together and came up with the idea that we needed a bunch of people who have expertise and have specialized in internal medicine and infectious disease. So that part of the group is myself, Philip Ivans, as I mentioned, Scott Perry, who is based in the Dick Vet, which is part of the University of Edinburgh, David Rendell, who actually is currently BEVA president, but is also an internal medicine specialist. And just to explain, BEVA is the British Equine Veterinary Association, so he's an important link with the equine vets. And Matthew Robin, who at the time, he's also a specialist in internal medicine with a particular interest in exotic diseases. At the time, he was based in the UK, but actually he's currently in the Middle East. And so we're all medicine specialists. We also have Richard Newton in the group, and Richard's produced a number of resources for Equine Health Week. Richard is an epidemiologist, which means that he tends to look at infectious disease at a more sort of population level, whereas the internal medicine people tend to be focused perhaps on the, investigating and treating the individual horse. And then to sort of give us a good understanding of how equestrian sports work, we are joined by Jane Nixon, who has had a long career, particularly in working in a lot of equestrian sports, but she's very involved in the Showing Council. John McEwen, obviously, as I mentioned, is on the group, and Rolly Hours of World Horse Welfare. And that's the kind of veterinary lineup. Jen Ancliffe and yourself, as you know, I tend to also join our meetings to give us the advice we need on comms and how to do that communication that we need with the member bodies. So that's the lineup. Our specific aims are quite general. So our remit is to produce best practice guidelines and also advice to help British Equestrians members' bodies mitigate against the threat that's posed by equine infectious disease. And I think there are two reasons why that's extremely important. We all want to see our horses as healthy and happy as possible. And I think there's a public expectation that British Equestrian and the member bodies, everybody involved in equestrian sport, has a responsibility to do everything that they can to promote equine welfare. So that's the overriding reason for doing this. But of course, infectious disease not only threatens the health of the individual horse, but it also can, if there are outbreaks of infectious disease, that can disrupt the program of events and competitions and all the other horse gatherings. So our kind of secondary goal is to try to minimize the risk that horse gatherings would have to stop or be disrupted as a result of infectious disease.
Right. And actually, I mean, even though you're sort of only a few years old, you've actually come into your own quite quickly. We saw with the EHV outbreak on the continent. And then this year we've had, obviously, it's still on topic, but we all had to act pretty fast around the equine influenza flu vaccine shortage. And I think people sort of in the general public won't see all the work that went on with both of those. Can I call them a crisis? I'll call them a crisis. I think they don't see the amount of work that went on, but I can certainly say that you guys put in some hours to help us through both of those. And effectively, the collective efforts prevented an EHV outbreak really taking hold in this country, and equally got us back on track with the flu vaccine shortage. So I think the group's showing its value. And just take us through sort of the process in that, how you all acted. There's an emergency response element to the group too.
Yes, there is. So the various clinicians and experts on the panel essentially sit there as a sort of resource that are ready to respond when people need us. And we did a lot of work throughout our first year, which was 2020, essentially preparing plans and putting together resources that are available or were already available for other parts of the industry. And so it was very much a sort of paper exercise, you know, making plans. What would we do if? What would we do in various circumstances? And I think when you do these paper exercises, you don't necessarily appreciate just how useful that they're going to be when problems crop up. But the problems that arose in Spain in early 2021 was our first challenge, and actually the fact that we already had a plan really put us in a good place. So when the news came that there were British horses affected and that they had to safely come back to this country for their own benefit, but also it was critical that we didn't do anything that would allow the herpes to sort of escape from those horses into the wider population. So the fact that we already had a plan that had been made very calmly throughout the course of 2020 and utilizing plans that actually already existed in the thoroughbred industry meant that we didn't have to be making decisions on the hoof. So a number of the members of the group interfaced with other people within the British equestrian structures and some of obviously the people within show jumping to put in place a system whereby horses were quarantined and then they were tested at a relatively detailed level. We're lucky in the United Kingdom, I think, that there are resources here which were formed initially for thoroughbreds and for the thoroughbred breeding and racing industry, but we can make use of that for any horse. So that process worked relatively smoothly, and although you're right, it was time consuming, I think everyone was pleased with the outcome in that the show jumpers got back from Spain and there were no knock-on consequences, whereas in some of the other countries that wasn't the case. So the horses going back to other countries in Europe, there was further spread of the problem. And so that was our first challenge. The challenge that we've had this last autumn was one that I can't claim we had anticipated, in that one of the major manufacturers of influenza vaccine had a shortage, which thankfully is now over. And so, you know, having spent all my career really advising people to vaccinate against flu, certainly I would regard a kind of minimally acceptable program for a general horse that doesn't mix very much to be at least once a year, but actually for horses that are mixing more frequently, we would like to see them being vaccinated within 6 months. And there's a lot of scientific evidence for that. I know Richard talked about it earlier in the week, so I won't rehearse the exercises. But of course, in the face of a shortage, that became difficult. But because the group exists, and in particular we have the expertise of people like Richard Newton, who can, as I mentioned, can look at things on a more population level, we sat down with people from British Equine Veterinary Association and took a look at the population as a whole, identified that actually the most impactful thing that we could do is it was to look at those horses that are in a relatively low risk category, which are horses that are not mixing very much and are a little bit older and therefore have a sort of strong vaccination foundation, if you like. And so it gave us a structure for decision making, with the real goal there was to protect the limited vaccine supplies so that we could make sure that young horses, foals and yearlings, were definitely going to be able to be vaccinated. And that process worked fairly well. And I think it's good that we haven't got to carry it on any longer, though, because the problems would have become increasingly challenging. But the fact that we have a group, we have everyone sort of ready to spring into action, means that here in the UK we can at least have some sort of central coordination and communication.
Yeah, and I think that's really quite reassuring for a lot of horse owners, because it's an area that, as a sort of general leisure horse owner, you don't really think too much about it, but it's important, and I hope that a little bit of the content we put out this week will help raise some awareness for people in their day-to-day care of their horses. Now, last year, the group, we sort of have been working for quite a long period of time on a really comprehensive document, which I think is the life and soul for me of what the group is all about. And it was a sort of huge biosecurity. We all called it a Bible, because effectively that's what it is, but it's for horse gatherings. And most of us with horses, whether it's competing at an Olympic level, right down to traveling your horse to go on a pleasure ride, our horses tend to mix here and there. So that brings about a disease risk. So tell us a little bit more about that document, what sort of guidance is in there, who's it aimed at, and how can it help?
Yeah, so we put together what are entitled advice notes for British Equestrians members' bodies, and it's designed really for the member bodies at the sort of central level, but also people who are organising competitions and gatherings at the more sort of regional and local level, and it covers, broadly speaking, 3 main areas. So there's some extensive information in there about biosecurity and how we can prevent disease in general, such as by vaccination and taking care when we're mixing and moving horses. It then goes on into a disease section, which we've divided into again into sort of 3 areas. So they're endemic diseases, and that means diseases that are here in the UK at a relatively low level, but which can flare up and periodically cause outbreaks, and that is influenza, neurologic herpes, and strangles. There are a couple of syndromes that are relevant, and that they are again endemic diseases, but we will occasionally see outbreaks of gastrointestinal disease, a number of different causes. and neurologic disease, which can have a number of different causes that are both endemic and exotic. And what do I mean by exotic diseases? These are diseases that don't exist in the UK, but will occasionally invade. The ones that we really worry about are things like African horse sickness and West Nile disease. And so the document that I'm referring to, which is available on British Equestrian's website, goes through each of these different diseases and what we can do to reduce the likelihood that they're going to happen, together with some information about what would happen if they do occur. And it's primarily intended as a resource for the member bodies and officials of the member bodies. I should say that individual horse owners who want to just find out more about specific equine diseases might also want to have a look at British Equestrian's Diseases to Know About, which provides a little bit more general background information about the diseases. The focus in this document is very much on mitigation and management.
So a year on from that, and we're the group has worked on a further iteration, which is aimed mainly at venues, and it's a bit more of a handbook. It's a bit more succinct,
Yeah.
and the theme is around reducing risk together, because we all have to work at this, don't we? So so excited that that's going live. Again, just give us a little bit of a snapshot about what that handbook's, what's inside.
Yeah, sure. So we've taken out of our bigger documents the highlights or key points, if you like, that are relevant to venues, things that venues can actually have an important role in and might want to think about either changing or introducing suggestions that are in the document. I'm guessing that actually a lot of the advice that we give in that document venues are probably already doing, but the whole point is working together. I think it's very easy with infectious disease to sort of sit there as an individual and think, well, there's nothing much I can do about it. It's British Equestrian's responsibility, or it's the member body's responsibility, or it's my vet that needs to take care of this, or this shouldn't happen because the venue should be able to prevent it. Actually, with risk reduction, it's really important to remember that everybody has a part to play. It might be slightly different part to play, different areas where we can all make our contribution, but certainly from a horse owner's point of view, maybe the key thing a horse owner can do to prevent spread of infectious diseases is make sure that they know that their horse is healthy before they take it to the competition. So that's kind of their responsibility to make sure that they are not bringing disease into a group of horses. And then clearly the organisers have a role, the venues have a role, and at the more national level, the member bodies have a role. And we've really some of these contributions might be quite large, other contributions might be quite small, but when you add up that collective effort, that's how you reduce risk. Risk is not a yes, no, black, white kind of thing. We can never actually live in a totally risk-free world, but by chipping away at the risk, we can take a rather large risk and get it down to a smaller risk.
Really interesting. And as I say, it's going to go live today. How do people find a copy? If they're interested in reading, how do they find out?
They must go to the British Equestrian website, where they will find a copy. I'm guessing you'll probably be able to put a link associated with this. And please do go and have a look. I hope you'll find it a very useful resource.
Well, Celia, on behalf of, I suppose, the equestrian public at large, we thank the group and you for your hard work. You all do it on top of very busy practice jobs. So we're very grateful knowing that we have such a dedicated group there to help protect our horses at large. And we all look forward to reading through the document. We may not be venue organisers, but I think it's something that all equine people who participate in any activity should have a read through as part of that collective responsibility. So thank you.
You're very welcome.